Hello, everybody. It is Friday, and that means it's Sales Chats time. Hi, I'm Eric, and this is John.
Yeah, great to see you all. We missed you last week, but we're back again.
Yes, tanned, rested, ready, and right at you with a great guest today. We've got Chad Porter of Invisume, the Invisible Resume. Chad, welcome.
Hey, guys. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Happy Friday.
Yeah, so Chad, basically, despite stumbling into sales himself, he's had successful stints at eBay. He's been a speaker at various conferences, and best of all, he helps salespeople every single day find the roles of their dreams and helps companies place the right people in the right jobs. And that's something that we're going to get into and unpack today in today's conversation.
Yeah, we're really excited about it because here's something that you've never ever heard any sales manager or leader of a company ever say, and that's, I have enough salespeople, I have no problem finding them, I'm overwhelmed with fantastic candidates. That's something that's never ever been heard. So hopefully today we're going to talk a lot about why is sales recruiting just so hard.
It's easy. Everybody does it.
Absolutely. So Chad, why don't you tell us a little bit about Invisume and your backstory?
Well, yeah. We like all good inventions. It was out of necessity. And what occurred was a few years ago, I was in a role that, as we started to get into the role, I realized it wasn't probably going to work out based on the parameters that were there, and I was kind of faced with the decision as a candidate to do one of two things. I could either spend all my time looking for another job, because it is a job to look for a job, or I could basically double down and try and work through the issues and challenges that were presented at the organization. And I chose the latter. I chose to work through it. And thus, I was the classic, quote-unquote, passive candidate. It didn't work out. We weren't able to come to agreement on certain things, and I found myself in the job market, and coming from really an online advertising background and seeing how awful the process was and how I was a passive candidate, I would have considered things, but no one was necessarily coming at me, so was I not optimized properly? What was not working about it? As I started to look at it, I realized there was a big issue, and what we did is I spent a good year and a half doing sales recruiting as, in essence, product development and product research, and we talked to over 1,500 salespeople and asked them, what is the problem with job search? Like, why is it broken to you? And it really boiled down to primarily privacy. Of course I would consider a better job, of course I would consider something different, but you know what, it's not a real private process. It's very public on how this happens. And in doing that, we also discovered the way that you have to go through and quote-unquote apply for a job means if I do that with one, in order to just a simple sales funnel, I got to do it with 100. Well, that's 30 minutes per 100 things that I do to narrow it down to the 10 or 15 opportunities, to narrow it down to the 3 or 4. Who has the time for this? And if I have to fill out the same form for 100 companies, why can't I just do this once? And so those were really the challenges that Invisume chose to tackle with our technology.
Well, and it's broken on both sides of the equation too. As we know, statistically speaking, and we love the guys over at CSO Insights. They produce great reports where they talk to even more people for part of their surveys. And one of the things that they revealed in this year's 2015 report on Salesforce and its organization is that basically in the survey respondents' own words, 96.8% of companies are either increasing their sales staffs or staying the same. And given turnover rates, we know that means that they're hiring. Only 3.2% of respondents said they were going to basically reduce their sales force. So everyone's out there hiring and looking for the right candidates, on an everyday basis. Which leads us to kind of our Q1, and get the Twitter firing here. Hiring a new salesperson is that daunting process. How can a technology such as yours assist with identification and matching of the best candidates to the right companies?
Well, and you hit on with that study, you hit on one of the biggest points, which is it's a hot market. So what you're finding is that candidates are having what we call in the online ad world channel conflict. It's not that your recruiter reached out to them on LinkedIn. It's that your recruiter was one of 100 recruiters to reach out to them on LinkedIn. It's not that they didn't peruse your job ad. It's that your job ad was one of thousands of job ads out there. There's decision overload for them. And so what we've done, and by the way, in each offer, in every single offer that is out there, whether it be via a recruiter or it be for an online application, your identity is revealed. So now you're basically assuming risk of looking, because that's the way that the process goes. And you're not being asked to do it once. You're being asked to do it hundreds of times. So what's the natural human response?
And let's be honest, right? Like, most sales managers are connected to their reps on LinkedIn.
Yep.
If not other social networks.
Yeah, and it's an interesting conundrum nowadays that I always say is, if you're a salesperson, you're using LinkedIn to try and credential yourself with your prospective clients and customers, and then you're connecting with recruiters and you're really building an online resume on LinkedIn. There's a little bit of conflict there. What are you saying to the people that you're trying to sell to right now? You're saying, well, I love this product so much that I'm actually looking for a job somewhere else.
Exactly.
So there's all these inbuilt conflicts everywhere.
Exactly. And the other crazy thing is, it's not even just your sales manager is connected to you. Your sales manager doesn't even have to do that, because everybody you work with is connected to you. And the minute you change something on your LinkedIn, the water cooler talk goes to this. Did you see so-and-so change their LinkedIn profile? I think they're looking.
It's so true.
You might have literally just updated something because you think it's going to help you sell better, and now they think you're looking. Right. So it's crazy, the mentality that goes with this, and it's really, really difficult. What we do is, obviously, we add privacy to this process, which is huge, because one, maybe you don't want to leave, but you just want to be prepared in case you're not going to retire there, which studies show there's a 99.9% chance the sales job you're in today, you're not going to retire there. So do you want to have options down the road, 18 months, 12 months, 3 years? Sure. Who doesn't want to be wanted? But you would like to do that privately, and that's kind of that's one of the things that we tackle. The other thing that we tackle is, basically answering the question, do you have time to do a first interview screen with every company on the face of the earth? Not if you're going to hit your quota. And if hitting your quota is still important to you, which we hope it is, then you come to our service, and what we do is, it's basically one first interview. We ask a lot of different questions. It's really not resume data. It's a totally different data set, and we'll get into why later on. But so we get a totally different data set, and then we remove your identity, and all of the questions we asked are structured, which means I'm going to ask you the same question I'm asking everybody else, and there's no way I can tell who you are based on your answers, because I've given the question and the answer choice. So your identity is completely covered, and now companies can go in and shop and look at your data, which is basically first interview data, versus you having to talk to 100 companies.
Yeah. Do you find, and one of the things that I've noticed over the years, that even the best salespeople are not so great often at selling themselves. And obviously, when you're looking for a job, that's one of the key things you're doing. I mean, you are the product. You're selling yourselves, and then you're selling yourself. And yet, these guys who are great salespeople, but they're just not good at selling themselves.
It's true, and they're not good resume writers either. I mean, there's those two components are huge facts, and it's hard, and part of it is that the context of it, right? What question am I supposed to answer? What question's in your mind that you're looking for? And so that's that unstructured data part that goes towards the end of the funnel of the hiring process, where you're really just trying to get to know each other. And that to us is more the important part of, hey, how are we going to work well together? How's this environment fit? That needs more time than the current process allows us to do, that because we're stuck looking at resumes and doing first interviews, which is that process takes up 60% of the time, and it's not the most important part. The most important part is this person that I've narrowed down to my last 5, are they going to work here? Is that going to work? The last 5 should be the most important, but it gets the least amount of time because the first part of resume looking and first interview screen is so difficult to do. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that leads us to Q2, really where much like customer personas are critical in building a marketing campaign, creating an employee persona is an important step in the hiring process, right? Cultural fit is everything. So I'm going to ask this 2 ways. So first, how do you suggest people locate the ideal candidate? We're going to get some answers coming in on Twitter as well. But then how should candidates, on the flip side, locate the best jobs?
Okay. So the answers actually kind of correlate. But what the process should be 2 phases. One is the data structure phase, and that's kind of the top of the funnel phase. What does my ideal candidate profile look like? What does my ideal company profile look like? No different than what we do in sales every day, right? What's my ideal client profile when I'm prospecting, right? It's actually the very same process. Within that, where people oftentimes skew the wrong direction is they put something in there of, I'll know it when I see it. Okay, then you need to look at everybody. And do you have time to look at everybody? No. Well, then we need to be a little bit more structured about this. So, what that means is we need to come to some data-driven conclusions. It could be years of experience. It could be average tenure. It could be industries that they're in. It could be products that they've sold. Whatever you feel is the most important. It could be selling style. It could be things like that. Now, you're going to structure this data, and you have to have a strong criteria for it, and you need to be flexible with it. So let's say there's a 1 to 10 that you want, to check off. Well, you're usually not going to get 10 out of 10. So take 8 out of 10, create a 5 to 7 bucket, and then anybody below 5, you can probably release that group. But what that means is you go out and you start to gather these market numbers, and you start to understand, and this is kind of it's like shopping for a car. You need to start to look, well, I want to buy this particular car for this particular price with these particular miles on it. How many are in the market? If it's 0, you're not going to get that car. If it's 100, you might be able to get that car.
Of the 1,500 sales managers that you actually interviewed, how many were implementing any kind of structured data analysis like this within their companies?
We didn't go into how many we're looking at it from a data structure standpoint because.
Good ballpark.
I would say you're probably looking at that believe they're doing it. You're probably looking at 50%.
Right.
But the question I then always ask is, well, what data are you gathering? And they always basically come back with resume data. And then my question is, does that correlate with how you do the job?
Yeah. So do you find it in the conversations that you've had, do you find that people get kind of disillusioned pretty quickly, or get, because they put out an ad for a salesperson and they say, and they have it built into their model that they're going to hire them mid-next month, and then the candidates don't come through, that the ideal candidates don't come through, so then they start widening the search, and before you know it, they end up hiring people who are kind of far removed from what their ideal persona was, and guess what? They don't tend to work out.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this, of a client that we worked with in the process, and the premise of our engagement was there are thousands of people in this particular geographical area that we can hire from, and we want to hire about 24 a year from this pool of thousands. That was the premise. So I said, okay, give me your data structure. What things do they need to have on their resume for you to consider them as a candidate? And then they provided it over. So we went and we did the research and we looked. And when we got done, we reported back there are not thousands of people that fit your criteria. There are 124, of which you're not going to be able to hire 24% of that market, because we know, as you've told us, your rejection rate is about 95%. So of the 124 that are there, you will likely reject 95% of them. What's your next move?
Wow.
And that's the process that we ask people to go through. No different than a marketing survey, right? Okay, what's my audience size? Same thing. You need to understand what your audience size is, and the only way you can do it is with resume data today. But what happens is that forces a lot of conversations down on your first level screen to your HR. And so now if you don't define that very well and measure that very well, then you're going to run into another problem of them making emotional decisions and passing on people because you didn't define data-driven decisions for your first level interview screen very well. And that's where we're a little bit unique, is that we are gathering that first level data to basically ease the burden of your HR team and allow the better people to kind of get past that, and those that don't fit move on to something else that's more appropriate for them.
Well, and we actually had a question on Twitter that I think fits very nicely into a company's approach, and it's, you know, how many sales managers or companies really make their candidates take a personality test as part of the hiring process in determining alignment within their sales organization?
It's a great question, and the answer is not enough of them because it's not 100%. And then where it fits in the process is another kind of thing that we look at and are trying to disrupt as well. So today the way it works is I go to companies A, B, and C. Companies A and B give me 2 assessment tests after I get to, say, the second or third stage of the funnel. The company then owns that data. I can't leverage it again. Thus, I must take tests over again.
Right.
Makes no sense in the process. And the other thing that's kind of funny about it is that assessment is usually reserved towards the end of the process as one final knockout. The reason is they're paying for the amount of tests that are being given, right? And they don't want to pay for 1,000 when they can just pay for 5, which makes total sense economically. But when you look at the process of it, it makes absolutely no sense. The candidate should have the information. The candidate should publish the information privately and anonymously, and then from there it should be sorted and filtered. So the only people you should even be considering are the ones that would have passed your assessment in the first place. But that always is at the end of the process when it should be at the beginning. So it's a little bit of cart before the horse, cart before the horse. So.
And do you think, just generally speaking, that we are unrealistic about the time frame it takes to find and hire the right candidate? Because again, you know, we're very impatient. We get the requisition to hire the person. We put the ad out, and we're expecting, like 2 days later, we're saying, "Where's all the candidates?" And we're very impatient. Do you think we're just generally unrealistic in our time expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. You're unrealistic on the time expectation. The expectations placed on HR are unrealistic. Your recruiters, and the reality of it is, it's again because there is no shopping engine at scale that you can go to and say there are X amount of people in my market that fit, like you can a car. That's really what we're building, is that database of I need to know kind of what my shopping experience is going to be like. And so where we envision this going is the director of sales walks in to HR and says, "Hey, this is the hard data criteria of what I'm looking for." And HR says, "Hey, hold on a second. This. Yeah, great. There are 37 people that fit this hiring criteria, and you're saying you want to hire 20 of them. So are you sold on 0.7 here? Because if I change 0.7 from a must-have to a maybe, we go from 37 to 237. And then do you want to make that decision now? Okay, give me 2 buckets, an A and a B bucket. Great, we'll go ahead and do it. Hit the button, message them all, and they come in." That's what we're building today. That's the type of experience that we're shooting for. And today, it's kind of one at a time. I got to go look. I got to talk to them all. Scheduling, it takes hard to do. Response is hard to do because it can't be yes or no. It's got to be an eloquent response back. It is a really overburdened process. And so the expectations are absolutely out of whack because there just aren't the tools and the culture's not built to really engage that way yet.
And do you find as well, because I was talking to Eric before we came online here about one of the best decisions I ever made in my career, quite frankly, was a number of years back, is when I actually paid quite a lot of money to a professional resume writer, one of the top ones in the country, and the difference it made to the response I got was just unbelievable. And looking back at the time, I thought, wow, this is a lot of money, because it was well over $1,000 I spent at the time. It's a lot of money to spend on this. But in retrospect, as you
were
look
investing
back,
in yourself.
investing in myself, and the payback on that investment has been, exponential, quite frankly. But do you think, as candidates, that we often don't invest enough in ourselves, and we expect to try to do something that's this significant on the cheap?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Your resume and your LinkedIn profile, if it's being used to garner a career, should then be today, under today's current conditions, you should be looking at it like SEO, because that's exactly what it's used for. So if you don't have the right keywords, you're not going to come up. And so it's your resume isn't just simply the story of who you are anymore. It's also it's a marketing tool for online unstructured data search finding. And so today we live in a world of absolutely unstructured resume data, and there are thousands of programs and hundreds of companies being written to try and structure unstructured data, which is effectively trying to get one side of one language talking to another language, because the language that employees are talking about is not the same language that employers are talking about. They're speaking two different languages, oftentimes using two different keywords, and it's not matching up. And so a professional that's really good at understanding that aspect of the search aspect of it and can tell a story with it, certainly worth the money.
Yeah, I mean, that actually answers the question of how candidates can help land the best jobs for themselves, right? Begin to think of themselves as a marketable product, if you will,
Yeah.
Where they're passing through filters unseen to them
Yeah.
at any given time. Right? I mean, maybe invisible resume is like a really good kind of thing to think about, because, job searching and job finding is such a opaque process for everyone involved.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would even go a step further and say, if you're going to invest in it and you want to hunt, to have your resume out there is a passive way to do it. We're all salespeople, and a lot of us are hunters. And if you really want to go do it, well, I would also invest money in virtual assistants to go and target companies and build lists and build target lists and reach out to the hiring manager and build relationships that way. I would take a much more aggressive approach to it, and you don't have to make it as I want to close to a job. You might even make it I'm going to kind of make it like a drip marketing campaign that says, I'm going to shoot to have lunch with one hiring manager at this list of 50 companies over the next 24 months. And I just want to have one lunch a month with them just to network that way. I'm not even looking, but I want to be prepared for the next role and understand what's going on. And we say all these things as good things to do, right? But the reality of it is most of us don't have time to do it, and most of us aren't investing in it. And that's, hence the reason we're trying to solve it. But anything that you can do to be proactive on your next job, starting now, starting the day you start this job, anything you can do to be proactive on your next job is going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's a tough. We had a Twitter question come in talking about, does this change dramatically when talking about commission-only salespeople? Who oftentimes are in their own kind of world, so to speak.
It's a really, really good question. In our research with the 1,500 folks, we were primarily focused on B2B. And what we found was that commission only is typically more of a B2C role. Not always, but it skews that way for sure. What we found was that there's no barrier to entry of B2C inviting B2B. That doesn't match. So the industry that got blamed the most for it was the insurance industry, and we've spoken to folks there and they understand it. But the reality of it was everybody gets hit up for insurance jobs, no matter what your resume says. You're going to get hit up for an insurance job at some point in time, and that is a big turnoff. So when your company is sitting there saying, going back to expectations, I don't understand why aren't people responding to my ad, or why aren't they responding to my inquiry? They've been asked not only about your role and your industry's roles, but they've been asked about outlier industries that they have no interest in. It's just noise to them at this point. So how do you break through the noise? It's really more of a marketing question there. But yeah, so when you get into the non-commission roles, that's a whole game in itself. But yet we treat B2B exactly like we treat B2C. They're two totally different folks, and they're all good at what they do, and it's two totally different roles. But we know B2C folks are a little bit more, I call relational. I think B2C folks are a little bit more relational, and that's great. It's not my personal sales style. I understand that relational is part of it, but I'm more inquisitive. I ask a little bit more questions and do a little bit more problem solving, and like to have some kind of tech solution to it. That's just my style. We're two totally different people, but yet companies aren't necessarily respecting that difference in how you're built from birth, basically.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into kind of our Q3 here, which is, we've touched on big data and unstructured data, and just frankly too much data being the enemy of smart hiring.
Yeah.
How can we leverage more of what you're talking about now, the innate human skills that are all part of working at a given company, that are all part of getting the right cultural fit or having the right like temperament or psychological profile for a given company? How do we get that into the hiring process?
The first thing we have to do is start gathering the right data, and we have to ask the question everywhere: is resume data, as it sits today, the end-all be-all of data that we should be gathering? We say no. We say it's resume data and it's first interview data and it's assessment data, that these are all of the things that are going to start to make the perfect mix. This is really what we should be sorting and filtering on and quickly making decisions on in a binary yes-no, ones and zeros type of environment, and then targeting ads towards those people. That's kind of where we see the world. Why? Does that mean I hire that way? No, absolutely not. You're going to make an emotional decision, period, end of story. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to accept it. But when it comes down to it, you should have data-driven choices to make the best emotional decision. And in order to do that, instead of spending 60% of your time on basically the data capture and data structure and data gathering and data analysis, why don't you spend like 10-20% of your time on that and increase the amount of time you spend with the last 5 candidates, the most important? Instead of having one final interview, why don't you have a couple, 3? Get them really involved in it. And so spend your more time on the social side. It's an interesting study that we read in a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it talks about how the human brain works. And we're all going to make emotional decisions. We're all emotional creatures. No matter what we choose to do, that's how we're going to decide. And as salespeople, we all get that. But what's interesting was the #1 reason that recruiters are rejecting resumes is they're hungry. As in, I haven't eaten. It's 10:30. The resume I looked at doesn't look good to me because my stomach's grumbling. 2:30, same problem. And that's the study that they revealed. And a quick story to that is I know someone that recently just went through the interview process. And this is a first HR screen, right? So this is beyond even the resume. This goes to your HR screen. Mm-hmm. The HR person said, here's the job title, here are the 10 functions that we do in this job. The person on the other end of the conversation, the candidate, said, yeah, that's great. I actually have done not only all those 10 things in my current role, but I've got these other 4 things that correlate to it, and then proceeded to talk about how they interacted not only with those 10 things and understood it and had expertise in it, but that these other 4s would be valuable as well. The interviewer's response back was, hey, that's great, I love it. It doesn't sound like you're a fit. And so she said, well, why would you say that? And you're like, well, your job title doesn't match our job title. And so she said, well, that's just what we term it. It's our internal branding. And she's like, but I think you'd be good for a junior role. But that's all we do is a junior role. She had to proceed to go back and talk her through every aspect again before she's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're more of a senior role. And so I got this story relayed to me, and I asked one question. What time was the interview? And she looked at me like, what? That's the dumbest question you've ever asked me. Why would you ask me that? I said, what time was the interview? And she said it was 2:30. And I go, she hadn't had a snack. She was hungry.
Yeah.
So let's see. The takeaway here is that if you want your dream job, send your resume along with a Starbucks coffee and a Danish pastry at 2:30 in the afternoon, and then she'll eat it, she'll drink, she'll go, this is the best resume ever.
It sounds like that's our Sales Chat Supercharge sales tip of the day.
Edible resumes, people. Edible resumes.
Edible resumes.
I like it.
I love it. Well, we're hitting the half-hour mark, and this has been fantastic. You know, we've got a bunch of kind of actionable takeaways. We've got some really, you know, progressive thinking on the entire hiring process. Thank you, Chad Porter. I think this was a fantastic episode.
This absolutely, because as I said at the beginning, it is still, I always say to people, it's still the #1 problem every organization faces is trying to find and recruit good salespeople.
Well, guys, thank you for the time. I really appreciate you hosting and the great questions, and thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.